Good morning, everyone. Pastor Young here, and excited to open the Word with you all, and glad that you're able to join me for Bible study. Let's open in our Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter, let's see, we're going to start in chapter 8. 1 Samuel chapter 8. We're going to start reading in verse 1. It says, "And it came to pass, when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, the name of his second was Abiah, and they were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways." It's key. "But they turned aside after filthy lucre," that's money, "and they took bribes and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah. And they said unto him," these are the elders talking to the prophet now, "Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations." Now, I've taught on this quite a bit. And I've even preached on this at a few conferences, because a very, very important lesson to take away from this. For so many years, I thought that the elders of Israel were insulting Samuel. I thought that they were ridiculing him, I thought they were saying to him, "You're obsolete," when they say you're old. I thought they were saying, "We're not interested in what you have to offer anymore." I thought they were telling Samuel, "We've got a new way of doing things now. We want a king." I thought that, but that's not at all what they're saying. In fact, if you'll notice, these are the elders of Israel that gather to speak with Samuel. So these are people who are also old, you see? The key is not in them saying, "Behold, thou art old," in verse 5. The key is in that second phrase. They say, "And thy sons walk not in your ways." So it's not just that you're old, but it is the fact that you're old and your sons don't walk in your ways. What they're saying to Samuel here is, we know that it won't be long and you will be passing off the scene. And what will we be left with for a prophet? That's what they're saying. You see, the key is that your sons walk not in your ways. And they then say to Samuel, "Make us a king." Because as the Lord revealed this to me sometime last year, what they're really saying is, I would rather have a physical king than a false prophet. I will take my chances with a politician that I know is crooked versus a pastor who is maybe crooked, maybe not. They're saying to Samuel, I would rather take my chances with the physical government rather than a spiritual government that is contaminated. So let's look at the response, though, because the next few lessons we're going to be getting into the reign of Saul. Okay, it says in verse 6, "But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, 'Give us a king to judge over us.' And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they have said unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them." The Lord is telling Samuel, this is not about them insulting you. They are choosing physical government over spiritual government. They're choosing to rely upon physical leadership rather than spiritual leadership. Verse 8, "According to all the works which they have done since the day that I have brought them up out of Egypt unto this day, wherewith they've forsaken me, they've served other gods, so do they also unto thee." So the Lord is saying, just as they've forsaken me, now they're forsaking you, right? Samuel, now you know what I feel like, is what the Lord is saying. "Now therefore, hearken unto their voice, howbeit yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them." Now, Samuel then gives a list to these people that are requesting a king, and what he's doing here is he's granting their request as the Lord has told him to do, And what he's doing is he's saying, okay, you want to be like everyone else. You want to dress like everyone else. You want to act like everyone else. You want to talk like everyone else. You want to be like all the other nations in the world. And so what Samuel is saying here, as he gives them this list, he's saying, if you want to be like everyone else, you're going to be like everyone else. Meaning, if you want to lower your standards to the place that everyone else's standards are, then you are then going to experience a lower level of provision, a lower level of protection, a lower level, because whenever you lower your standards, whenever you lower your consecration, you're not able to keep the same benefits. You see, that's what Samuel's saying. Oh, you want to be like everyone else? You want to look like everyone else? Okay. Well, everyone else doesn't have a God that will fight for them and rush into their battle and discomfort their enemies by thundering in the heavens. If you want to be like everyone else, well, everyone else doesn't have a God that will blot out the sun in Egypt, but send light in Goshen. You want a political power, that's fine, but understand that a political power can't do those things. You want to be ran by a physical kingdom because there is structure, because there is relatability. Hey, you with me right now? They are the whole spirit of the people is we want a physical leadership because we can't relate to spiritual leadership. We want physical leadership because we can't. We're having a hard time communing with spiritual leadership. We want physical leadership because we have an issue accessing spiritual leadership. we could just pick up the phone and get physical direction, but we're going to have to get on our knees if we want spiritual direction. We could just pay the piper to get physical direction, but we're going to have to sacrifice in order to get spiritual direction. We could take, man, all right, Lord, here I go. We could just take folks out to eat, and get physical advice and get physical, leadership for what we are seeking. But we're going to have to fast for spiritual leadership. You don't go out to eat for that. And so the spirit of the people is I don't really want to commune with God. I would rather commune with man. I don't want God as my head. I want man as my head. Because another thing about spiritual leadership is you can't manipulate it. Another thing about spiritual leadership is that you can't buy it off. You can't give God enough gold for him to compromise his standards. But you can give a man enough gold to where the man will not hold you to such a high place. You can't bribe spiritual leadership. You can't buy spiritual leadership, but you can buy a man. Now, as Samuel starts to give these warnings to the people, okay, you want to be like everyone else. This king, look at verse 11, and he said, "This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. He will appoint him captains over thousands, captains over 50s. He will set them to ear his ground, to reap his harvest, to make his instruments of war, instruments of chariots. He will take your daughters to be confectionaries, to be bakers, to be cooks, to be bakers. He will take your fields, your vineyards, your olive yards. He'll take the best of them. He'll give them to his servants. He'll take the tenth of your seed of your vineyards to give them to his officers, to his servants." Samuel is warning them, saying, this is what physical leadership looks like. This is what it looks like whenever you choose physical leadership over spiritual leadership. You need to understand what he's saying here, okay? If I can kind of translate for Samuel to you. He's saying, you have an issue with spiritual leadership because of what it will cost you. But he is trying to express to the people that physical leadership also has a price. It's not as if you get it for free either. So the point that I'm making today is that if you're going to have to pay a price anyways, you might as well pay the price to follow the Lord. You see, whenever you buy into this world system whenever you talk like everyone else, when you dress like everyone else, when you go to the same places everybody else goes, whenever you lower your spiritual standard and you choose to follow the leading of the flesh or the physical rather than the spiritual, you got to understand that that's not free either. Yes, it's true that we've got to sacrifice if we're going to walk after the Spirit. Absolutely. It's 100% true. Take up your cross and follow me, right? That it costs something. But don't be fooled in thinking that following the flesh is free. Because following the flesh will have its cost as well. So if you have to pay anyways, if I'm reminded of Jesus who said, you got two options. You can either fall upon the rock and be broken, or later on the rock will fall on you and it will crush you. What Jesus was saying there is you're going to have a confrontation anyways. You're going to pay a price anyways. It might as well be the one that you end up not having to suffer for eternity. If you're going to have to pay a price, what Jesus was saying there, the rock thing, you can pay now or pay later, but it's a whole lot better for you to pay now. You see, it's a whole lot better for you. I remember when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I was going to a church in Bossier City, and a buddy of mine, we snuck back into the fellowship hall, and we were playing soccer, as best as you can in the fellowship hall, and we were kicking it back and forth, and I kicked it hard. I kicked it really hard. And would you believe, folks, that there was a window in that fellowship hall it was very small. It was probably this big. And it wasn't tall. It was, just kind of a small window. And just like the Lord guided the stone out of David's sling, something guided that soccer ball right perfectly into that fellowship hall window. And it broke and shattered. And, all of the kids that were in there with me, everybody froze. We're like, what just happened? Oh my goodness, we just messed up. And I remember at that moment, my parents telling me, if you do something wrong, come up to us early. Come to us, come up, be upfront with us about it. And because it'll be a lot better for you if you're upfront about it than if you try to hide it. And so I rushed to my dad, and I just, my friends couldn't believe I did this. I probably looked like a punk, but they weren't going to get whooped for me. So I ran to my dad, and I said, Dad, I did something wrong. I said it in front of God and everybody. I said, Dad, I did something wrong. He said, what'd you do? I said, I kicked a soccer ball back in the fellowship hall. I broke the window out. And he said, what? You did? I said, yes. And I said, but remember, I'm telling you now because you told me I wouldn't get in as much trouble. And I put it back on him. I said, this is what you told me. And folks, my father was good by his word. I got a little scolding, but he knew I didn't do it on purpose. And before long, the window was replaced. I didn't have to pay that tremendous penalty that I would have if I'd have kept it quiet. And then, because the truth was going to come out no matter what, right? Those folks that were with me, they were going to tell. So what I'm saying is, if my physical father is able to honor his word and say it's better to just do it up front, to pay the price you're going to have to pay it up front rather than delaying it and then paying on the back end, you better know that the Lord himself is good by his word, that if you will allow your fleshly will to bow, if you'll allow the sacrifices to be made now, it is a whole lot cheaper than if you are going to pay on the back end for eternity. Okay? Samuel is saying that it's not free either way. You don't like the price that spiritual leadership is costing you, but understand that physical leadership is going to cost you even more. In Deuteronomy chapter 17, Deuteronomy 17 and verse 14, okay? Turn there with me. Deuteronomy 17 and 14. The Lord is giving law. He's giving direction to Moses for the people, and the Lord gives in Deuteronomy provision and understanding for the time that Israel comes to in 1 Samuel 8. He prepares the people in the law in Deuteronomy 17-14. He says, when thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God gives you, and shall possess it, and shall dwell therein, and shall say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. Then shalt in any wise set him a king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt. The Lord starts to give provision way back in the law, because God saw from the beginning where Israel was going to end up, and he saw that one day the people are going to desire physical leadership rather than spiritual. So, when Samuel begins to warn the people, and you can continue reading that if you want in Deuteronomy 17, it goes from Deuteronomy 17 verses 14 all the way through 20. But I'm trying to make these a little shorter, so I'm not going to read all of it. So once we get to 1 Samuel 8, and Samuel starts to warn the people of God about what is to come if they want to select the king. The Lord, once again, you have to look at the spirit of the people. And the spirit of the people is pointed towards physical leadership, carnal understanding, rather than spiritual. And so what God does is he gives them the desires of their heart. He lets them have a king. But the king that he lets them have is exactly what they're desiring. It is a king who represents the spirit of the people. Saul, because I know, many of us, we wrestle with, okay, wait, God chose Saul. God is the one that tells Samuel, this is the one that's going to reign over the people. They didn't have an election. They didn't set it up and write in ballots and all that. They didn't do that. God chose Saul. So I know many of you probably wonder the same as me. If the Lord is the one that chose Saul, why did God choose a bad egg? I'll tell you. It's because the Lord wanted to choose a king that represented the spirit of the people. And that is, if you want carnal leadership, I will choose someone that will give you what you're asking for. I will choose a king that gives you carnal leadership so that you can see what that tastes like. You see? Now we get into where Saul really enters the picture. Chapter 9 of 1 Samuel. Okay? And I'm going to be wrapping up pretty soon. 1 Samuel chapter 9. Now there was a man of Benjamin, whose name was Kish, son of Abiel, son of Zeror, son of Becherath, the son of Aphiah, Benjamite, a mighty man of power. And he had a son, Kish had a son, whose name was Saul. Saul in Hebrew means high, lofty. It means tall. It means of great stature. Because remember, the people are desiring something impressive in the flesh, okay? And a goodly. And there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulder, that goodlier is really just impressive. From his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people. He's a tall man. That's why his name was Saul. And the asses of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. Kish said to Saul, his son, take now of the servants with thee, and arise, go seek the asses. And he passed through the mount of Ephraim, passed through the land of Shalisha, but they found them not. And then they passed through the land of Shalem, and there they were not. And he passed through the land of the Benjamites, but they found them not. And when you see, that is exactly what will happen whenever you follow after the flesh. It's interesting how the people want to follow after a man that can't even find his own donkey. It's interesting how the people of God have decided they want to follow after a man. What did Jesus caution in the Gospels? He said, look, if the blind end up leading the blind, and he's talking about if the Pharisees who are spiritually blind end up leading the people who are spiritually blind, he said, if the blind lead the blind, then everybody ends up in the ditch, right? What Jesus was getting across there is, if you're going to select something to follow, you better make sure that what you're following can see. You bet if you're going to make a selection as to what you're going to walk after, you better make sure that whatever you're walking after has true direction in its heart. You better make sure that what you're listening to and what you're following after is able to catch the direction of the Spirit. Because if I follow someone that's headed to the ditch, guess where I'm headed? You see, maybe there's a little bit more to what our parents have always asked us for so many years. If your friends told you to jump off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? Or if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? Maybe there's a little bit more to that than what meets the eye. Because I know all of us were confronted with that question as a kid, and of course all of us had the same answer. No, Mom, I wouldn't do that. Well, you better make sure that you know what direction they're heading in before you decide to follow. I know what direction Jesus is heading in. I know what direction the Spirit is heading in. I know that it is leading me towards heaven. The fact is, sacrifice, though, is going to be a pit stop. Consecration is going to be a pit stop. Prayer, fasting, reading of the Word, these are going to be destinations along the way to heaven. And you need to know that the flesh, the Bible says that the heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know it, right? It says there is a way that seemeth right unto a man, right? There's a way that seems right according to my flesh, according to my mind, according to my eyes. There is a way that seemeth right unto a man. It says, but the end thereof are the ways of death. So what it's saying is, you can't even trust your own heart. You can't even trust because your heart is nothing more than flesh. It's saying, you can't decide for yourself how to walk, because that will lead you to a fall. That's called pride. Pride leadeth to destruction. A haughty spirit goeth before a fall. Let he that thinketh to himself, hey, I'm standing up. You better take heed lest you fall, right? It's the whole concept of these warnings are not just to keep you on your toes, but it is to keep you vigilant and make sure that you are following the Spirit and not the flesh. If you follow after the flesh, the Bible says that the carnal mind is enmity with God. It is opposing what God is trying to do. The flesh is pitted against the Spirit. And so whenever we follow after the flesh, the end thereof are the ways of death. God grants them their wish whenever they say, make us a king, and their spirit is pointed towards wanting fleshly leadership. The Lord elects, the Lord chooses, the Lord anoints a man who is only going to follow his fleshly desires, a man that is only going to follow his knee-jerk reactions to situations, a man that is going to not listen. And here's, I was going to save this for another lesson, but I think what I'll do is I'll close this one down with what I'm going to teach on next time. And that is, what is the big difference between Saul and David? Okay? We know that David's kingship is very successful. We understand that David, man, that guy had it going on. And God anointed David exactly like he anoints Saul. He anointed David the same as he anoints Saul. Were the circumstances the exact same? No, but what I'm saying is God selected both of them. So what is the key difference in Saul's kingship and Saul's leadership and David's leadership? And this is what I leave you with today. The key difference is this. Saul represents fleshly connection, whereas David represents spiritual connection. If you continue, and we will on Monday, we will continue looking at the reign of Saul. And what I want you to see is that any time that Saul needs word or needs direction from God, Saul does not go to God. He goes to man. He goes to a man of God. And his relationship in leading, his relationship and how it defines his leadership of the people of God is still funneled through a man. I'm saying that Saul did not have his own walk with God. He had his walk with Samuel. And the moment that Samuel is removed from the picture, the moment that the flesh finally crossed the prophet one too many times. Saul is headed for destruction. I say all of this and I teach all of this today, not for the sake of scaring you, not for the sake of saying, hey, you better. I teach this because the Lord really challenged me a day or two ago. I'm going to be honest with you, and I'll tell you that I work hard to put these videos together. I work hard on these Bible studies. I listen to the Lord. I try to get what the Lord wants me to hear and what He wants me to deliver. And I was expressing some of my concerns to the Lord. I said, Lord, you've got Joel Osteen, you've got Joyce Meyer, you've got these people that really I consider pseudo leadership in as far as spiritual concerns. You got Stephen Furtick, you got all of these big names. And I don't want a big name. But I was telling the Lord, I don't understand why they have such an audience. I told the Lord, I don't understand how these people are preaching only parts of the word, not the whole word, and people are crawling over one another to get to listen to all of these people, and I'm teaching everything I know to teach, following the leadership of the Word and of the Spirit, and I've got 50 something YouTube followers. I'm not complaining. I'm not whining about it. I'm just asking the Lord, what's the deal? And I'm not just me, great men of God that I admire in a great way, and I look and the stars, Beyonce and other stars, I don't know many of them, but they've got millions and millions and millions of subscribers and followers and people hanging on their every word, and they have nothing to say. And yet I looked at Brother Jack Cunningham, who's one of the greatest preachers alive today, and he barely has anybody following him on these social media things compared to Beyonce. And I'm asking the Lord, what in the world is going on here? Why is it that some of these people can gather such an audience, if you will, the Sauls can seem to gather such an audience, and nobody hangs around to listen to a David? And the Lord gave me just a simple answer, and He said, people don't want to hear a voice that pulls them to repentance. People want to hear a voice that pulls them to encouragement. People want to hear a voice that tells them that everything they're currently doing is already right. You don't have to change anything. But the Lord told me, He said, any voice that pulls the people to repentance, you will lose followers. Don't you understand that even Jesus Himself had people that walked away shaking their heads saying the price is too great? Even Jesus Himself had people that said, I don't want to listen to this. This is a hard saying. So I want to encourage you actually today, not just to take an examination of yourself, as I ask you to do that every day, but also I want you to look outward. Look at the voices that are influencing you, and then look at who you're influencing. And I want you to just ask yourself this, whether it is them to you or you to others, and just ask this question: is the blind leading the blind? And where are we headed? Personally, I'm going to spend today in repentance. I have prioritized things incorrectly, and I know this won't be the last time. But I want to let you know, folks, that God has given me a wake-up call, and that is, I will not compromise what I teach and what I preach so that more people will subscribe. I want you to know that this word, even if in the end it only leaves me with a few people, I would rather have this word in a few than just my own words in many. I encourage you today to ask yourself, and not what your intentions are, because our intentions are always right. I want you to ask yourself in practice, am I following the Spirit or am I following the flesh? And for either, examine and say, what fruits do I have that prove that I'm following the Spirit? Or what fruits do I examine that cause me to wake up and say, hey, this proves I've been following the flesh? I love all of you, and I pray that this word has blessed you today. And I want you to continue, just stay with me, okay? Share this video, send it to people that you think it'll bless, and I pray that God blesses you. I love you.